morning, everybody, and welcome to Old Testament 500. I am your professor, Beth Hayes, and I'd like this morning to go over a few things about the syllabus and about assignments and about reading, just to kind of touch on a few questions I've seen already in the course questions form and to get us oriented to the class. So before you go any farther with this, you might want to go ahead and get a copy of the syllabus out, and I'm going to read mine off my tablet here and point out a few things as I go along. So I'm going to go to the very first page, where you'll notice that you can find my name and phone number, cell phone number, and then my email address. Now, I'll be doing some significant traveling over the summer, so the email address is going to come in really handy. So I want you to be sure that you have that. Even when things get hard to get a hold of on the phone, the email address is very useful because I check that quite often. You can call me by phone 9 to 4, Monday through Saturday, with the exception of the times when I'm out of the country where I will not have phone access. But I will go and be checking the email on a daily basis and be sure to get back to you as soon as I possibly can, unless I'm in the air, which I'll let you know that day before it happens. Okay, so this is a course that's going to take you through the literature of the Old Testament, and you can read that description for yourself there, and also the issue of the learning outcomes. We've tried to coordinate the assignments to the learning outcomes, so as you go along in the assignment section, you can check back up here and see which assignments kind of work alongside each one of these learning outcomes. And of course, we're going to be online for the next 10 weeks, 9.5 weeks now. So we'll want to be sure that you're comfortable getting around in the course. And for that reason, I put a little survey in this week. So you can go in there and check off whether or not it's been easy for you to find certain things. And also then put in, if you have some comments or things that you have questions about, put them in there and I will address them again in another short video in another few days. Now, the first thing we want to look at is the required reading. This is a course where there's a lot of required reading, just as most Fuller courses. It aligns perfectly with the expectation of our department in giving you this amount of reading. So it's very standardized that way. So you don't need to feel that you're online so you're reading more. That's not actually the case. You're reading just about what you would if you were also in an in-class setting. Okay, so we have required reading at the top is certain sections of scripture, and then a book by Bernard Anderson called Out of the Depths. This one is not an ebook, and you'll notice I did assign for you to buy it. Oftentimes this one is available as a used book. I would highly recommend it. Don't be dismayed at the fact that there's 16 pages assigned, because actually you'll be using this book a lot when you write your Psalms paper. So there's an assignment to read, but then there's also this as a resource for your Psalms paper assignment. And then our main textbook is Michael Coogan's Brief Introduction to the Old Testament. And I will say at this point in time, Coogan is very informational. He's not meaning to write an Old Testament theology. This is actually an Old Testament introduction. So an introduction to the text and the issues surrounding the writing of the text, the compiling of the text, what's in the text, the literary features of the text, and so on. It sort of forms the basis of what you will then later on use to form an Old Testament theology. But I've had conversations with students before who seem to think it would be a theology book. It's not per se a theology. It's an introduction to the material that we'll be reading this summer. We will talk theology in the class, but you will probably find your Old Testament theology coming from other places rather than this particular textbook. The reason I do assign this one is that it's full of good information, lots and lots of pictures, lots and lots of connections to other places where you can go and find other things about various topics. Okay, so very informational, not necessarily a theology tome per se. The next section there are all available through the Fuller Library. I've assigned you 90 pages. And the ones in Ministry Matters, you'll need to go in through Ministry Matters and then follow the prompts to get to the New International Bible Volume 4, and then follow through there to get the page numbers. SCA, Introduction to Reading the Pentateuch, the pages assigned actually ended up in e-reserves, which is the next section. So they're pretty easy to find. And then there's a few more things in e-reserve, some of them mentioned specifically, and then sort of a random collection of articles and chapters, which allows me to add or take away depending on what we actually are doing in the class. But all of those articles that are mentioned here are now found in eReserves. So let me tell you something about eReserves. I found when I went to go download those to put them into my tablet that some of them would download immediately as a PDF. Others of them I had to actually click on it and make it form into a PDF. So if you don't get an immediate response of a PDF downloading, you may need to go into File, Save as PDF, or do some other things. So as you have experiences with that, you might want to post into the course questions forum if you're having a hard time with it. But I did notice I could get some of them really easily. Some of them I had to actually follow a couple more prompts. So hopefully we can figure that out for you and you can get those downloaded this week. Now, mentioning eReserves brings up something we'll talk about in the reading, but we do top load in this class. So your class reading is to start immediately, mainly because that gets a lot of this sort of into your system and you'll have it to use rather than trying to add it as we go along. So we'll talk more about that when I get to the actual reading section at the bottom to the schedule. Now, recommended reading, here are a few more resources, and from there, if you choose, you can go out and probably find even more. But these are some basic things, and some people find them very useful to have on their own shelf. Keep an eye out for copies of the Dictionary of the Old Testament, for example. Those things are really good to have on your shelf just as time goes by. Okay, and then we have a list of assignments and assessments. Here's where the assignment gets coordinated with its learning outcome. And we'll talk more about each of these as they're going to come up. We'll have certain class activities. We'll have weekly forum posts. 20% of the grade is this forum post, and then 20% is the reply. So the forum post or response is an important assignment that you'll do each week. I'm running 2 sections of OT500, so you may have a Wednesday, Friday due date for those 2 things, or you may have a Thursday, Saturday due date for those 2 things, and that should be clear in each of the 2 classes, which of the 2 you have. Both of them are announced in this week's forum post, so whatever that pair of days is in this week's forum post, that's going to be your pattern for the entire class. Okay, so you don't need to look each week to question that. That's just how it's going to be the whole way through. Okay, so then we're also going to do the reading, which is accounted for some of these hours. You'll do 2 different projects, which we'll talk more about as they're going to come closer, and then also an interpretive essay that examines an Old Testament text. This is what we're calling our signature assignment. It's a 2,500 to 3,500 word paper. Totally, it's worth 40% of your grade, and we do this in stages. So you'll do 3 assignments beforehand, and then we'll put all of that together and actually write the paper. So let's look now at the assignments as they're laid out on the calendar. Okay, you'll notice that you've got 3 different columns and spaces for each week. The paper project assignment worth 40%, the forums 40% total, and then the 2 projects, which are worth 20% of your total grade. Where we'll want to spend a little bit more time even than this particular video is talking about the paper assignment. This is our kind of our big one for the class. So for example, next week, your assignment will be to choose a psalm from a list that's in the book up at the top of the page, and then you're going to write it up according to the expanded instructions. Now, all of this is going to be sort of available to you right now in that book at the top of the page called, I think I had a paper project assignments and helps. And it's a little book you can flip through, read the assignments as they will be coming up, and notice the different things you'll want to be doing for them. Now, each of those pages in that book should be, hopefully, linked up to the appropriate forum post where it's actually assigned in that particular week. Now, I will open up the entire class and you'll be able to see this and check through. And what I'd like you to do is to kind of look through those assignments and then also click on the link and let me know if you find any broken links. I've gone through and I've had one student let me know that there was a broken link, and it didn't appear broken from my end because I had the paper available to me. So it was broken for students who did not have the paper available. And so I think I've corrected that one. But anytime there's a broken link or something that you can't connect with, do let me know and I'll take care of it as quickly as I can. Usually it's a matter of simply clicking on something in the back of the course. Yes, and if by any chance, hopefully this won't happen, but somebody wrote me a really funny email last term saying, I don't think my paper is really 120 days overdue. Can you please look? And it turned out one of the forms had a due date clicked on it from 2 or 3 classes ago, and it was quite funny. They got me to turn that off quickly, but it was rather hilarious that they felt that their paper might be 120 days overdue, which of course it wasn't. Okay, so the next assignment there is a 10-item annotated bibliography, and this has changed with our recent change in curriculum. And so what you'll be using are any of the classroom assigned sources. So you'll be going through your sources and working those up according to the assignment there. Then we're going to do a genre assignment. We're going to do an assignment where you kind of keep track of the questions that are coming up as you're researching and then write them up. And you'll use that sort of as you're forming your final paper to work on answering some of those. Do notice that assignment 4 is to hand in the final draft. It's due by midnight Friday of the last week of class. Okay, not the week that's assigned for finals, but the last week of class. The reason I do this is that inevitably in the course of the term, something comes up. And it's really nice to have a few spare days at the end in case I do have to give anybody for a medical or an accident or that kind of thing, a few extra days to work on the paper. But our due date is that Friday. So go ahead and check that. Make sure that you've had a chance to look through every one of the paper assignments as they're written in the book, including how to write the final paper. Because if you look at assignment 4 first, you'll see where we're actually going with this paper, and that's actually really a good tack to take. Look at the very last assignment first and then work through it again. Okay, the forums will be done according to topic. So we're going to do Psalms, Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, 2 Samuel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Daniel and Job. Okay, so each week we have one book we're looking at pretty intensely, and the forum post will be something about that book. And this is where you go, oh, so many things, so little time. And I'm hoping that I've picked out some good questions for you, but there's a lot to talk about in the Old Testament. And so we're just going to touch on a few really key topics in each one of these books and see how they play in together. The reason I'm starting with Psalms is that this class used to be called Writings as Introduction to the Old Testament, and we always started with Psalms. Because Psalms are something that I think most of us have a bit of a grip on, and it's really fun to see how the historical information and all of the different topics then begin to connect with the books of the rest of the Old Testament. So it's going in a little bit sideways with it, but I think that you'll probably enjoy it. I really enjoy starting with Psalms. Okay, and then our 2 projects, we'll do an event line. The reason I talk about an event line is that some things in the Old Testament sort of defy having a date. So we want to make sure that we're talking events as opposed to dating. And we'll talk more about dating schemes for Old Testament events as well, because there's probably more than one theory going on about that. And so we'll talk events. How did things happen? What happened first? What happened second? What happened third? And put them in chronological order without necessarily attaching specific dates. Okay, and then for the other project, we have actually 2 different things going on. You can either watch movies and write up a 5-page paper that's a compare and contrast, or you can do a creative expression, a song, a poem, a reading, a photo, an art project, something that comes up and is inspired by and is connected to your psalm. So you want to be sure to establish connection between your psalm and your creative expression if that's the way you want to go. And I have to say, of all the assignments that I read in this class, that one is so much fun. So I'm going to look forward to seeing what you all come up with. And we'll probably do a gallery of those as well because it's fun to share them. Now, The reading assignments, this is where it gets a little interesting because people look at my first and second week and go, oh my gosh, what's she doing? I have to read so many things. Well, if you look at this week, aside from writing up your introduction, doing the reading is the only thing that really is available to be done. And so it's a really good time to take that time and use it to read ahead. And we're always going to be working ahead a little bit for what's the form for the next week. So for example, this week you're reading about Psalms. Next week you will write your form about Psalms. And likewise, next week you'll read about Genesis, and the following week will be a form about Genesis. So we're always reading ahead and sort of filling our pot, so to speak. So we have stuff to pour out when it's time to do the writing. E-reserves, when you go in there, you can sort by author in order to find which ones go in the first week, which ones go in the second week. Let me talk here about that. That looks like a lot of pages all at the same time. I would recommend highly that for this particular part, the e-reserves reading, that you go through and instead of trying to read word for word, go ahead and scan. Okay, look for main topics, look for their main headings, stop when it's interesting, have a read, kind of go through, make sure you touched on every page to just get a good general idea of what's there. Then when you get a view of what's going on for next week's forum post, for example, it's going to talk about lament in the Old Testament. You'll go back and go, oh, I remember that Gilkey's and Rice had said something that really caught my eye. Go back, pull them out, read them again. Okay, so this is what we do now as master's students and beyond is we read, but we also reread and reread again. And so we'll touch on things more than one time. And so for your first go through, feel really free to kind of skim and get the main ideas and go through the next one, get the main ideas. Now, the method to my madness here is that probably to do that, you'll have to get them all downloaded to the appropriate point, whether you're going to print them out or put them into your tablet or some other kind of way of reading. So mainly what you're seeing here is compile and have a quick look at. Okay, I will ask you what you've read, but I'm not going to ask necessarily that you have a quiz or you be able to sort of back out what's in there, because that's not really what we're doing with it. We're looking for these ideas in order to interact with them and to talk about them as a group. That will happen in the forum. So, if you get bogged down in reading, this is really a nice time to go, okay, I just have to kind of go through this page by page, take a look, and then move on from there. Okay, so that happens for 2 weeks, and then look for the rest of it. I don't really have any more e-reserves things put out there. I may ask you to go back and have another look, but I don't have any more added. So the reading after the first 2 weeks then goes mainly to scripture and to portions of the textbook in Coogan. Okay, so at that point you're kind of hanging on to that textbook as being our raft we're riding on through the class. How are we going to get from A to B? We're going to use Coogan as our raft through the entire Old Testament. And by doing that, we've kept you in sort of one spot for all that main information. Okay, so we've got 3 different types of things that we're reading. We've got the textbook material, which is informational. We've got scripture, which is oftentimes both informational and very effective, especially when you're reading Psalms. It's something that can really make a change over the course of time, and especially when you pick out one that you'll be doing your paper on, you'll be actually interacting with that quite a bit. And then there's the e-reserves, which stretches you a little bit out into some of the other places to find information in the library when you go on to different kinds of courses from here. We're at the sort of, quote, beginner level of the signature assignment. And so we're going to keep to our internal assigned work here. We're not going to go out to the library and find 25 more books. So really what you've got here in the syllabus is what you'll be using over the term, which is kind of nice. It's nice to have a little bit of a corral around how many different things we're going to be looking for. Now, the next page is a grading rubric. You'll notice that there's some both letter grades and percentages. I do use the grade book in Moodle. However, I also leave it open that I can change up or down a little bit depending on the quality of work, simply because the grade book collects numbers, and grading in the arts here is more than just numbers. So there's other aspects that I want to see happening as well. Engagement with your friends in the forums, sort of the level of change over the course of the term, for example, with the depth of reading or the depth of responding. All those kinds of things sometimes don't get captured by numbers. So I want to leave a little wiggle room, but you can keep your eye on that if you like, and you'll notice that you'll kind of land in a spot and probably stay fairly much in that spot depending on the type of work you're doing. And I always look at this going, well, most seminarians are going to do B plus A minus work. So if you really want to work on your grade, go beyond what you normally would do. You can make that effort and you'll see your number go up a little bit. But I don't just, I've heard students say, how did I lose points? You don't lose points in my class, but you do earn them. Okay, so pretty much I try to stick with seeing what sort of job has been done and how that plays out in the forums, plays out in the assignments, plays out with interaction. And at that point in time, you can sort of like work your way up a bit. So it's not a case that I start with 100 and start ticking them off. This is not the type of material you can do that with. It's not like a science paper or even a language paper where you can mark off for small errors and that type of thing. But what I'm looking for is your level of thinking, your level of engagement, and your level of synthesis of the material. And synthesizing different kinds of things is really like the the pinnacle of the process. And so that takes a little practice, and we'll see how we go from there. Any questions, any comments? There are two places you can go: the course question forum, or you can email to me if it's something of a personal type of nature that doesn't necessarily need to be heard by the class. But most of the time, there's more people than yourself who come up with the same question. For example, why is this link broken? Or what do we do with this authorship issue and that kind of thing? And that last point lets me point to you for the fact that we do have a second forum, not just the course questions, which is over the nuts and bolts of our class, but this other forum is for like, oh my gosh, I never heard that before, right? I always thought Moses wrote this. What am I going to do with this new thought that maybe this was compiled elsewhere? Or some of those things that sometimes are a little bit startling when you begin to take an academic look at Old Testament text. Those things, those questions, comments, debates can go up in the say what forum, which in past terms has been really fun because usually there's somebody else who wants to talk about that. There's usually somebody else who wants to talk about why do we have kind of two different things going on in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and 3? What's going on here? How do we handle that? So I highly recommend that forum as well. It's really fun to see the conversations beginning. So again, I will be as available as possible. There are 50 of you between the two classes, so I'm hoping to be very communicative with you, but I'm hoping you don't feel too badly if you get a shorter comment on some of your forums that, I've been here, I've read what you said. I do like to leave a little footprint, although sometimes those footprints can be a little bit tiny. Do know that I will read every single word you write, and I will be very thoughtful about doing that. So again, be in contact. I'm really looking forward to this. It's going to be fun. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.